Many video games have been transformed into movies, and invariably movies are released as video games. But one filmmaker has completely changed this dynamic. Julian, filmmaker and founder of CleverNoob.com, has released a feature-length documentary exploring a theory that explains the ambiguous and ultimately dissatisfying ending of Mass Effect 3. Julian is here today to talk. How are you, Julian?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
I am excellent. Now, the film is simply called The Indoctrination Theory, a documentary. For those unfamiliar with what exactly indoctrination is to the relation to the game Mass Effect 3, could you add some insights?
Well, basically, indoctrination itself is something that the main antagonists of the series do to some of the protagonists as well as any person in general, and it's kind of like an effective mind control. And so the theory itself is stating that because the ending was so bad and so just basically it was just so inconsistent with the rest of the series and the writing styles that it left so many major plot holes. So the indoctrination theory itself aims to fill those plot holes in an acceptable way that sort of says, well, the ending didn't fully happen yet because of just how bad it is. But it does go beyond a little bit more than that, and I do explain that a little bit more in the video.
Mm-hmm. Now, what motivated you, I should say, to create this project? How did you get started, and what was your real passion behind it?
Well, my passion was definitely the series itself. It wasn't so much that I couldn't accept a bad ending. It was just that there was absolutely no closure whatsoever. And when I got to that final, choice when I was actually making my own playthrough, I kind of sat for about 30 minutes not knowing what to do because it was just that hard. And so basically I actually paused it because I had been recording it for a playthrough for an Insanity Mode walkthrough. So I paused the game, looked at the recordings for maybe a half an hour, and I realized something's not right here. So eventually I actually went on Google and I actually ended up typing in Mass Effect 3 best ending, and it sort of just unraveled itself. I found out about the indoctrination theory, read a lot more about it, and eventually I was like, all those things I was thinking about while playing make a lot of sense now. And so I just kind of took it off and ran with it. I figured it would be a great idea.
Well, yeah, now you have this wonderful documentary that's an attestament to that. Now, me and you, we talked about it beforehand. This is such a polarizing issue, especially for the fans, so we thought it would be appropriate if we asked the fans any questions they've had for you. They've seen the film, they've agreed or disagreed with segments of it, and they'd like a little bit of your clarity, a little bit of your insights. So again, these are 10 questions that we've gathered from fans of the Bioware social network and associated within YouTube. So starting off right now, we have a question from Kotigum. I think I'm saying that right. It starts with, how did you find the majority of the points covered in the video? Was it from forums or your own first-hand experience?
Well, it was a little bit of everything. It was kind of just a melting pot of everyone's ideas over the months since the game released. Like I said, I definitely did not come up with the theory on my own. This is an amalgamation of, hundreds or thousands of fans, really, ideas. And two videos I had actually seen. One was from a place called The Angry Joe Show, and the other was another fan-made video from a person named Akavios. Both of those were about 20 minutes long, excellently well done. But I found that both of those had information that the other did not. And then I also found a blog by Parably, who had a bunch of information on there that didn't have anything that either of those two had, in addition to just other forum posts and things around the Bioware social network forums. Pretty much just tried to take all of those pieces of information together and analyze it from as best of an arbitrary position that I could do. So it wasn't necessarily any of my ideas aside from a few bullet points, but the most of it came from the fans.
Mm-hmm. We have a question here from Blue Liara. It's, I think, a very important question. What would you say is the single most compelling piece of evidence for the indoctrination theory? Something that simply cannot be coincidence or accident and has yet to be explained.
Well, I hate to say it, but there really is no Holy Grail piece of evidence, and I think that's one of the strong suits of the theory, because if a company was trying to do this kind of a mind-blowing ending, they wouldn't want to make it that obvious to where you can pinpoint to one thing and say, that's it, that's what the answer is. But there are definitely some very major topics that are in support of the theory, and the best one, if I had to pick one, I would probably go with the fact that Shepard survives at the end if you pick Destroy, whereas he does not survive if you pick any of the other endings, provided that you have certain requirements met. And I think that's significant because of the fact that if Shepard was in a giant explosion, as we saw in the game, that was something that was maybe thousands of times larger than the explosion that happened on the Normandy, his ship, in Mass Effect 2, and that was enough to propel him into space and kill him. So why didn't this kill him? I mean, you see the ending scene of him breathing in rubble, and that's been very debated. It's either London rubble or is it the Citadel rubble? But for me, it doesn't matter, because if that is real, and let's say that is Citadel rubble, then he would be effectively floating in space now. So he shouldn't be just pushed against a piece of gravel. He should be more or less floating. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, an explosion that large would have just killed him on impact. So I think that in itself, because it's been proven from Bioware themselves, I think that is probably, if I had to pick one, that would be it.
Okay. Now we have a question here from Metis, wonderful name Metis. He mentions that the documentary has only been published for a couple of days now. In hindsight, is there anything you've seen that you find compelling or interesting but didn't have the chance to include within the finished product? Things that maybe fell on the editing room floor and something maybe you'd like to add as an afterthought?
There are a few things, and I'm actually contemplating whether or not I'm going to make a part 2 to include all of these things, but a few snippets would be when we're having a conversation with the Elusive Man and Captain Anderson before we go up to the decision chamber. Basically, when Captain Anderson makes a statement, he says something along the lines of, "You're being indoctrinated." And when he says, he says that, and then he says, "They're controlling you." But when he says you, he actually looks at the point of view from the camera, which at that current moment was Shepard's point of view. And a lot of people thought he was looking at the Elusive Man because of their close proximity. But if you actually track his eyes, I did this frame by frame, and his eyes never look at the Elusive Man. They're looking at the point of view of the camera, which is currently Shepard. And another quick intermission that a lot of people have said to me, why didn't you include the fact that there are tree reflections in the final room? You can actually see like foliage, trees, and bushes in the reflections of the metal paneling when there aren't any in the actual crucible room. So my answer to that is that it could have just been, as we know, Bioware was rushed, so they had to make some cuts. Maybe they took the trees out and forgot to remove the reflections from the metal, because it's not directly observable unless you have the PC version of the game and do free cam or fly cam, whatever that program is called. Mm-hmm. So among a lot of other things there would be, but I hope to go over those in the second part if I do go along with that.
All right, and now we have a question here from Pirate Wench 24. There was, I guess, 23 other people that had that username. In your documentary, you indicate that signs of indoctrination are shown solely in Mass Effect 3. However, Shepard has several encounters with Reaper or Reaper tech in the previous games. Were there any other signs of indoctrination present in earlier games? And if so, why isn't it incorporated within your documentary?
Well, I think that may have actually been an overlooked point of the documentary that a lot of people have alerted me to. And looking back, I think signs of the indoctrination probably started during the Arrival DLC in Mass Effect 2, because it took, chronologically, that was the last piece of the game that we saw prior to Mass Effect 3. And what happens in that DLC, in a nutshell, is that people who are indoctrinated, they have this whole Reaper artifact, actually managed to kidnap Shepard and keep him hostage for 2 days. Over 2 days, it's like 2 days and an hour or something like that while he's sleeping. And the theory of the Codex is actually saying that it takes roughly 10 days for someone to become fully indoctrinated. So I think that could be the starting point of when Shepard actually starts to get the effects of indoctrination put into him, but it just takes place subtly, because a lot of people have argued with that at the beginning of Mass Effect 3, you see the little boy who no one thinks is real, according to the indoctrination theory, playing with his what is it, a little ship, that's what it is, out on a field. And the last words, theoretically, that Shepard hears from the Reapers is, "Your mind will be ours." And then the game opens in Mass Effect 3 with that scene. So a lot of people made that correlation. I think could be true.
Mm-hmm. We have another question here from Solid Snake 1. If indoctrination was planned all along, why do you think Bioware and EA would stay silent about it for months, risking media backlash and an increased loss of sales? This is more of a personal question than actually the specifics of the documentary.
Right. I think realistically, if I were in their shoes, they had been pressed for time. There's a whole story behind it, but the nutshell is that EA was pressuring them to finish the game, and back in November, the actual original ending had been leaked. So I think what they were trying to do is, one, hope that people would take the original ending that we got in Mass Effect 3 at face value, but I think they added in all these clues as an ace in the hole in case they got that big of a backlash, which they did. And I think now the reason that they're not saying anything about it is because there's actually even a document that they came out with that said they want to see lots of speculation from everyone, literally quoted. So that's what they're getting, and it's actually good for business to have this kind of speculation, whether it's bad speculation or good. It's still giving the game attention, which is good business for them. So why would anybody, release the real ending if it's true before a game releases, theoretically, in that aspect?
Harmoner1 asks questions regarding the ending that seem to be intentionally ambiguous. Could this mean that Bioware, you kind of touched on it, intended for multiple different endings and multiple different perceptions on the ending?
Yeah, I think, like you just said, we sort of talked about that, but to elaborate a little bit more, I think they did basically intend to have these two different variations, and one of the things they had said was they did not want to have an A, B, or C ending, and yet that's what they provided us with. So I think, again, due to the rushed time constraints, they initially wanted us to take the one we got at face value, and if not, then we figured that, we can fall back on this. And it all revolves back around the concept, or rather the debate of the artistic integrity, which is what a lot of people have been talking about. But I do think that they wanted people to take this in multiple different ways because they really didn't add any closure. So judging by that, I would say, yeah, they did want people to come up with different endings in their minds.
This particular user had a similar question that kind of is a follow-up to that. You mentioned there is a difference between gamers having different perceptions on how the game ended and different perceptions on what happened, but in the end there is a reality of the events, of the actual events that are considered canon within the game. And a lot of people are saying that you can't really make a choice between the other. You can't live, they are mutually exclusive. It's either indoctrination theory does exist, and that is essentially the canon ending, or it is the more face value dissatisfying ending that we've gotten in Mass Effect 3. How do you respond to that? Do you believe you in that particular type of logic, or no?
I do, actually, because they had been going off of a canon throughout the entire series. Not a canon, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, from a canon.
I do agree with that because I think it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for them to come up with a whole abstract ending when throughout the entire series they had been following one direct storyline. So I do agree. I think it's either indoctrination or bust, and I think we'll find out when the DLC comes. So.
Absolutely. Now, this is a more technical question about a very specific instance within the documentary. It's from username 111-98753. Very strange. But here it goes. Why in some endings is destroy the only option available, do you believe? Doesn't this disprove the indoctrination theory? If the Catalyst wants you to choose the other two options, it makes no sense that he would lock you out of the other options. If anything, he would force you into control, which is sometimes the only available option, based on your EMS and collector-based choices. So this is dealing with the different ending choices you have at the end of Mass Effect 3.
Well, I think it actually makes a lot of sense in my personal opinion because when you have a game that would ultimately leave you with three choices, and two of those choices end up killing the main character, and we find out later that that's not the real ending, he's not going to be able to progress. So I think this was done to actually help newcomers to the series who haven't played it before, who have a low EMS, who haven't played any of the other games, so they naturally just give them the destroy ending. And something that a lot of people don't know is the fact that if you've played Mass Effect 2, and at the end of the game you get to choose to save or destroy the collector base, if you choose to save it, which is something the Elusive Man wanted you to do, and if you have a low EMS then in Mass Effect 3, your only option is then control. So I think the only thing, or the only reason that they did the destroy-only option for newcomers to the series is just to help people so they don't have to replay it when the DLC comes out, provided that this is the true ending.
Mm. Question here from Romy Barboza, and he states this more as a criticism. It ties into what you were talking about before of where Shepard was found in regards to the rubble. Goes into saying, you say that the rubble when Shepard survives is London rubble, yet I've seen London rebarbs and they look nothing like those in the rubble scene. However, the wiring in the Red Hall with the dead bodies and the wiring on top of destroy and control option devices are exactly like those in the rubble scene. Even in the chasm, this is material that looks concrete, that is Citadel and Crucible rubble.
Well, I took a big look at that because I had heard that criticism a couple times, and I'd just like to reiterate the fact that it doesn't really matter whether it's London or Crucible Rubble at all. I mean, for the theory, it should be London Rubble, but I'm just going to play the devil's advocate against myself and assume that, let's say, it's the Crucible Rubble. Well, then why is Shepard breathing? He should be dead. And furthermore, an explosion that big would immediately bend any strength of rebar, immediately wrap it around whatever metallic or whatever object that it hits. But in the actual video, you see, well, as he says, wires. You'd see the wires sticking straight out of the rubble. But after an explosion of that magnitude, there's absolutely no way that a wire, no matter what the thickness is going to stand straight up. It's going to be wrapped around like coil around whatever it hits. So that, to me, immediately turns down the fact that whether is it a wire or is it rebar. And the fact is, it actually does look exactly like the rebar as well. It's kind of the same exact model, which puts a damper on things.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take on that. So.
The final question we have here is really an amalgamated question that a lot of people had, but I think this user really summed it up quite nicely. It's from Solid Snake. Goes, do you feel at times there are moments where the evidence for the indoctrination theory doesn't really fall into place and you need to force it to congeal with your other arguments, essentially grasping at straws?
Well, I've heard that phrase a lot by the critics, and really the only two things that anybody has been able to say is, one, criticize the whole Geth have no souls aspect, which actually has nothing to do with the theory. So I was a little surprised to get that kind of a response as the main criticism. And the other was the whole armor aspect, which I could get into a little bit later, but for time I won't. But that was even considered plausible during the video. So these things, these critics are saying grasping at straws when the only things that they're referencing while saying that are things that I myself said are plausible and things that the fans themselves have been saying could be true, could not be true, but yet they refuse to address any of the bigger issues. But for me personally, I don't really have, I mean, everyone's got to have some type of doubt because it hasn't been 100% confirmed by Bioware, which they're not going to do. But realistically, like I said, I tried to think about everything from an analytical point of view, and I myself blew off the theory when I first heard about it. I thought it was just a bunch of hoping fans grasping at straws. But when I looked into it, it actually presented itself to me more in a more affirmative way. So I think everything that I've covered, I tried to tackle with an honest opinion, a non-biased opinion, and I stand by it. So.
And just for me personally, you mentioned it before, but the extended cut DLC is coming out for the end of Mass Effect 3. That's going to supposedly give us a little more insight into the endings of the game because there was such great dissatisfaction associated with it. If this particular DLC does not make reference to the indoctrination theory, but instead just kind of continues the story of, you know, having a prologue and mentions of the events of characters and doesn't really add any sort of direct evidence to this theory, where do you believe that leaves the theory?
Well, I think if they don't come out and sort of say that the theory is true come to the DLC time, not through public announcements, but through the DLC itself, I think they better have a really good explanation for all these plot holes and all these problems that have been seen. And the reason everyone's clinging to the theory is because there are no other explanations that anyone's been able to come up with, or at least none that have been able to hold any type of water to them or any substance. So I personally would not be upset if the indoctrination theory turns out to be true, or not to be true, provided that they have an equally good answer for why there were so many problems during the DLC.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for spending the time to talk to me today, Julian. As a filmmaker, what's next for you? Kind of the last going off point here. What's next?
Well, like I said, I'd like to hold a following up video. I'm considering it right now, gathering all the bits of information like I referenced earlier. In addition to a lot of other things, I might make a short follow-up, maybe 20, 30 minutes. I guess it's not short. But in general, I'm just going to go back to my roots with the website and just focus on walkthroughs. And maybe when we get more producers down the road, I personally will jump to reviews or whatever. Really, I just like to follow what the fans ask for, so I'll pretty much let them tell me what to do.
Certainly. And the documentary and the site you have founded is, again?
The documentary is The Indoctrination Theory, a documentary. On YouTube, we are Clever Noob Network, and the website is clevernoob.com.
Thank you again, Julian. I'm Andy Borkowski from Video Game Sophistry. Make sure you subscribe to this video, and all the information and links to the particular documentary and everything we talked about will be in the description right underneath. Have a great day, everyone.